Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer. Our friend from the United States joins us this morning. Richard Kazimer, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing pretty well. What's happening in your side of the world? Anything exciting to report, or is the situation pretty well normal?
It is hell of a handbasket time over here in the U.S. I'm not sure if you've heard about what's going on in Arizona, but if any of you Australians are planning on coming over here for a holiday, avoid Arizona.
In the short version, why is that?
They've just imposed a law that allows law enforcement to pull over and actually jail anyone who they feel is not a U.S. citizen. If you don't have your proper identification, meaning a birth certificate, if you look different, talk different, wear different clothes, you're subject to incarceration until such time as they determine you're an American citizen. It's one of the most bizarre laws ever. And
I wouldn't sweat that one too much. I don't think that's going to stand much of a legal challenge. I think that'll probably get turned over by somebody who decides to challenge it legally.
We shall see.
Time will tell. While we're talking about things that are done legally, sometimes it comes into focus, especially after some sort of natural disaster or something like that, good old-fashioned building codes and regulations and standards and laws that apply for domestic and commercial constructions and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes, especially at some places around the world, we suddenly find that the building codes have either been violated or are found wanting as a result of some sort of natural disaster. And it kind of got me thinking, because there was a very interesting documentary I saw not that long ago. It was called The Crumbling of America, and it suggested that there was lots of infrastructure in the United States that really needed attention, but that penny pinching and governments that didn't want to spend money and all the rest of it had not paid attention to. And it kind of made me wonder, how much does that also translate to building? Because, of course, people want to keep things and keep their costs down. Do we have substandard buildings? It's a question that sometimes is asked here, but it's a question that I wanted to ask you this morning. What are the building regulations like? And we'll just look, for purposes of our discussion, to your state of Massachusetts, because I realise, of course, obviously it can vary from state to state. So let's just have a look at where you're at. What are the basic building code regulations, and how often do you think violate them?
Well, when you build a new home, let's say a post and beam home or a brick and mortar home, you have to get a building permit from your local city or town. You go to the city or town office and go to the building inspector, and then everything needs to be up to spec. Everybody that you hire, all the contractors, from the people who lay the foundation to do all the wiring, they all have to be licensed, and all the material has to be up to spec. And then all of the big chains around here that sell building materials, all of that material is up to spec. The only time when you see a problem is when a contractor starts to subcontract out, and then you get people who are trying to cut corners, and then you see things tip over. It happens more times with a commercial venture as opposed to a residential home, and usually very early on in the construction, the roof will fall in before they've even put the shingles on. But rarely in a residential building. Some of the codes that you have to meet, particularly here in New England, is that your roof needs to hold any weight of the average snowfall. The insulation or the RH factor in the home has to prevent pipes from freezing. All the electrical wiring has to match how many outlets, how many rooms, how many appliances. Same thing with the plumbing. The water pressure has to handle all the amount of bathrooms and faucets and so on. Everything should be above board, but you have to go through the permits. That's where all the permits come in, and some people try to circumvent that because it may cost you a couple $100 to get a building permit.
Well, what are the usual ways that people try and circumvent building permits? Because I can imagine straight away that sort of thing does happen.
Doing a ground up, a brand new home, it's a little difficult to do that. If you're making repairs on an existing home, as long as you're doing it on the inside of the home and it's out of sight, then you'll see people trying to do it themselves. They don't want to go downtown and pay maybe $150 or $200 for a building permit. We bought a house circa 1790. It's going to require a lot of work. If I want to just renovate a few rooms, if I want to refinish the floors or do something like that, that's one thing. I don't need need a permit. If I want to change the wiring or if I want to add a bedroom, then I need a permit. I've got to get a licensed electrician to come in. So that's where you find where people are trying to do this on the sly, then they run into problems because they're either not qualified to do it themselves or they're trying to use cheaper wire and the wire gets hot and then you get fires.
Is that a major problem, or is it just something that pops up from time to time?
It pops up from time to time because you don't know that it's a problem until this house that I live in, for example, the wiring is very old. It has circuit breakers now to run all the electrical as opposed to the old glass fuses from years back. Now, those are strictly outlawed. So when I added an outlet in my basement to put my laundry dryer, I had a licensed electrician to come in. Now, he recommended that if ever I want to add any more wiring around here, I'm going to need to up the amperage on that circuit breaker. That's not something I can do myself. I can actually go out and run wires into it, but what it's going to do is it's going to cause an overload, and it's going to heat up the old wires that are in the walls now. And that's where you see problems, is people trying to overload their existing wiring, and then you get fires, and then you read about it. Some of the insulation in a lot of these old homes is the old horsehair insulation or newspaper they used to use for insulation. And if you start running hot wires against that, it's just a combustion problem. It's for everyone's benefit for it to be above board, and it doesn't save anybody any money by trying to circumvent the system, by trying to save on a couple $100 for a building permit, and then you lose the entire house.
What about the issue sometimes of cheap day labour that's used, that's often talked about in the US? Is that a problem with substandard work or not?
Not necessarily. It's not the labor, because the labor people are qualified, and any reputable contractor, whether they're putting on a roof or laying foundations or anything like that, you do get what you pay for, because if you're getting somebody who is doing it on the cheap, they're not reputable and they're not doing a good job.
See, one of the reasons why I ask about that is often nowadays people are always looking for somebody to do something on the cheap, because I think it's fair to say, even though deep down most people do, on the surface often people don't get it, that it's a false economy sometimes to do things on the cheap, which sort of dovetails to my next question, just briefly before we move on. How much of an issue is corner cutting with major commercial buildings?
That does happen as well, more so than in residential buildings. You'll see people go in and completely gut a building and then, again, do it on the cheap because it's very expensive. They may take down load-bearing walls to give more space. Let's say, for example, if you've got an old commercial building that was used as a factory at one point, and we see a lot of that over here, is that they're converted into condominiums. But what happens is that if you break down a lot of these load-bearing walls, it compromises the floor above you. So you do see that where people that are not really engineers and they're looking, well, how much more space can I get? How many more units can I put in this building to make more rent money or more condo sales? And then you see a lot of cracks happening. So it does happen, but that's where the local code enforcements come in, because they'll drive around the towns and cities, and anytime they see a dumpster out in front of a place or out in the alleyway, and they can see drywall in it, they know that there's construction going on. If it hasn't been listed as some place that has already applied for and has been granted a work permit, they'll go in and crack down and shut down on construction. So it does happen.
How rigorous are they? I suppose in some respects, those of us internationally might have a warped view, and you might have Hollywood to thank for that, but often it's portrayed, especially where commercial buildings are concerned, like no one gives a damn about the regulations, and those people who are paid to enforce them are usually bribed by people to look the other way anyway. I take it that what you're saying is, well, that makes for a good movie, but it doesn't really represent overall what happens.
I can't really speak to that. I don't know. Considering the amount of construction that goes on in any given city, the more attractive the city, the more construction, the more renovations that's going on. These agencies are strapped. A lot of times it could be one, maybe two people representing an entire city like Boston, for example, where there are thousands and thousands of buildings that are potential prospects for renovating. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it happens more than we see. Fortunately, it's not a big problem. We don't see the problem, but it's not a problem until something terrible happens, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and then it is a problem. All right, mate, if we can move on, something else that also comes into focus, and we're talking about things like car and house and contents insurance and stuff like that, what is and what isn't covered, and the speed with which claims are processed. And like I say, we're focusing on that. We're certainly not looking into the health insurance area, because that's a completely different area again. Overall, how do people feel about their insurance coverage? And of course, as I talked about before, once again, we'll focus on your state.
Auto insurance insurance in Massachusetts is required by law. Some years ago, Massachusetts decided to do this, that you cannot get a Massachusetts driver's license unless you show proof of coverage. Now, whether it's your own policy or if you're covered under your parents' or your spouse's policy, that is the law. If you don't have insurance, you don't get a license. If you don't have a license, you cannot drive a motor vehicle, period. If you're caught driving a motor vehicle, uninsured, unlicensed, you get a fine, you go to jail. Massachusetts is one of the no-fault states, but we do require personal injury protection, or PIP. And what that does is that regardless of who hits whom, your personal injury insurance covers any damages, so you can't sue the other person unless those personal injuries exceed the coverage. The minimum coverage on your personal injury is $8,000. That is required. What Massachusetts was trying to do is keep people out of the courts and have the settlements done quickly.
Yeah, well, of course, what happens is if you have the system where everybody sues everybody else, of course, the whole system gets bogged down, doesn't it?
Exactly. So what is required for Massachusetts is bodily injury liability, property damage liability, uninsured motorist, body injury, and personal injury. Those four factors are required in your automobile insurance coverage. Now, not all states require all four of those, but Massachusetts has one of the strictest laws. And I'm telling you, as speaking personally, I'm glad we have it. I was hit last year by an uninsured driver. Almost $8,000 damaged my car, and it was covered totally. So I can't say enough good things about Massachusetts auto insurance.
See the benefit. Now, when you have a look at things like house insurance and house and contents insurance, what's the issue with coverage? I know recently, last week, we had some reports about some tornadoes in certain parts of the US that are prone to tornadoes, and I can't help but think that if that sort of situation occurred in Australia, they wouldn't cover tornado damage in those areas that were tornado prone. Is that the case in the United States?
Yes. All homeowners, speaking from personal experience, the mortgage lenders require proof of coverage of your homeowner's insurance before your mortgage loan can be processed. Now, again, speaking personally, what we went through last year was that before our loan was finalized, we had to get homeowner's insurance and prove that, and then they closed the deal. Now, that only covers how much it would cost to replace your home, not its contents. And how they determine the value of your home is you have an inspector come in and they assess everything, how many rooms, how many square feet. So that covers that. The contents is a separate policy.
Yeah, the same applies here, that they're separate policies.
The storm damage, now what I'm getting at is the storm damage. What insurance companies do is if it falls from the sky, you're covered. If it comes from the ground, it's not covered. Meaning if rain falls from the sky and damages your home, it's covered. If the river or stream that you live next to rises up and floods your home, you're not covered simply because that means you're already living in an existing floodplain. Now, as far as a tornado is concerned, down south and then in the Midwest, it's what's called Tornado Alley. Those homeowners, and generally why you see most of those are mobile homes or trailers, as we call them here. Why there's a lot of those and not the post and beam homes is that those are predominantly low-income areas, and these people don't have insurance anyway. I suppose you can buy tornado-type insurance. It depends on who's covering you, what insurance agency does it, but generally they don't because you're in the area that gets hit year after year after year, and they're not about to pay off your claim.
Well, I mean, obviously there must be quite a few established homes in those areas in Tornado Alley. How do people cope, and how are they also able to raise mortgages? Because, I mean, they can't all be mobile homes. So how are they able to raise mortgages in an area where they can't get comprehensive coverage and where just statistically you have a look and you say, gee, there's a reasonable probability that this person at some point during the life of the loan is going to suffer tornado damage?
Getting back to the median income of that area, anybody who's got a lot of money is not going to be building their home in Tornado Alley. It's like when people that live near Kilauea in Hawaii have these multi-million-dollar homes and then they get wiped out by the lava flow. You know, anybody who lives on the head of a match should expect to get burned. The same thing happens here, Tornado Alley or in floodplains, is that your options are buying a very expensive policy or having no insurance. And most of these people don't have insurance. That's the bottom line. But they live there because they have to. That's the only place they can live.
All right. As always, my friend, it's a pleasure. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, brother. Looking forward to it.
And I should point out that Richard's always on the lookout for people to be his friend on Facebook. And if you'd like to be Richard's friend on Facebook, all you have to do is look up Richard Kazimer. Kazimer is spelled Kazimer, Kazimer. And if you ask Richard to be your friend, he will gladly accept, won't you?
I will.